and they were talking about what do you look for when you hire, and it was a brilliant answer. And he said, I look for two things: conscientiousness, batteries included. That was it.
I love that.
Greg, thanks for coming in.
Craig,
Really appreciate it.
great to be here.
So, high-level concept of this show, I guess, is to try and bring in leaders from the tech world, the trading world, but talk about recruitment. This kind of elephant in the room where everyone needs recruiters and no one really likes them. But to try and maybe lift the lid on best practice, how can people add the most amount of value, et cetera, et cetera. One of the reasons that I was really keen to get you in was I've now recruited for you at multiple companies in your various different iterations over the years. And you've always struck me as someone who gets it a bit more than most in terms of is very good at providing information, context, feedback, all the things that recruiters really need to ultimately add value to you and to try and find you the people that you want. And I think that would, there's going to be a huge amount of kind of experience, knowledge, and just the way that you look at it, which is very different than how kind of XYZ, hiring manager in a bank would look at it. And there might be some value there. I want to start though with a very basic word association.
Okay.
Knee jerk, first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
It can be as blue as it needs to be. I say the word recruiter.
Challenge.
Challenge.
Yeah.
In what sense?
In the sense that you alluded to earlier on, right? It's the challenge of trying to get a recruiter to really understand what you're trying to do. I mean, recruitment is very much a problem-solving exercise. I fundamentally believe that. And so what you're trying to do at the end of the day is solve a problem. And the challenge I've had, my experience is that working with recruiters, with the greatest respect, oftentimes they struggle to understand what you're trying to do and solve here. Their ability to understand the marketplace, candidates, the role, the job, what you're looking for. So it's a real challenge.
So when you say ability to understand what you're trying to do, is that understanding it from a macro perspective of how the role you're trying to hire for fits into your world and your org, and why it's important that this role is filled? Or is that trying to understand actually the sort of person you actually want and just the nuts and bolts of supplying relevant people based on the needs that you have within the confines of that role?
Yeah, good, great question. I mean, it's really about the challenge of understanding, it's the totality situation. So it's very much like understanding fundamentally the firm that we're trying to recruit for. So every company has its own culture, way of operating, different priorities, different attributes you're looking for. Do all recruiters take the time to understand, what we're looking for, who we are as a company and a firm? Not the case, right? And then secondly, understanding the candidates themselves and where they may fall short and taking time to meet them. You can tell oftentimes when a candidate, certainly for the senior roles, when the recruiter hasn't met the candidate, it stands at a mile. And so that tells me the ability of the recruiter, to kind of do, appropriate due diligence on the individual to really match it off. I don't expect a recruiter to meet every single candidate, certainly for like junior, mid-level roles, but some of the more senior roles, absolutely. If they're not taking the time to do that, how can you really solve the problem that is the recruitment that we're trying to do? You gotta meet the candidate, meet the hiring manager, come in the company, understand what we do as a firm, and then kind of go away and go, okay, get them brain cells whizzing around, go into your network, try and understand like, okay, that's gonna work, this person's not gonna work, that's an absolutely home slam dunk, and then go from there, right? And so it's the challenge to get the recruiters to make that investment, I guess, ultimately is what's difficult.
So there's a bunch of things there that I'd love to sort of get into, and I hate this word unpack because it seems like everyone uses it, but to explore further.
Yeah, sure.
The first thing you mentioned is culture, and like I hear this a lot whenever I speak to people on the hiring side of the fence, and a common phrase that I hear is like culture eats strategy for breakfast. This is something that everyone kind of talks about, and how it doesn't matter where you're going as a firm from a strategy perspective. If your culture's not aligned, or the people aren't aligned to your culture, you're going to struggle, essentially. So when you talk about the way that recruiters can understand like what I'm trying to do, step one is understand the culture of the organization that I'm working for. What does that mean in reality? Are we talking about just day-to-day life there and fairly granular things like how many days a week in the office are you? Or are we talking on a deeper level in a sense of like those qualitative skills that don't exist on a piece of paper and actually are the differential between people that really thrive in professional, trading technology environments, and then people that maybe come in and don't add so much value?
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot to unpack there, right? So I guess when I think about culture, what am I talking about? I'm talking about, I think a good description of culture, how it was explained to me a while ago, which stuck with me is, what's culture? First of all, what is that, right? So that's very much what happens when no one's around, when no one's looking. What are you doing? And so I've worked at a few great firms over the time, and they all have their own unique culture. How people operate when no one's around. Some firms are very risk adverse and have a low risk tolerance, so they're more measured in their recruitment approach, the technology they're using, how they go and acquire talent. Other firms I've worked with and been involved with have very much focused on more risk taking and thinking outside the box and being more creative, and that flows through to the talent, the process as well. And so you'll naturally want to align the talent with the culture as best you can. Of course, you want variety and diversity in that as well, but there's a thread, a theme that kind of underpins most firms. And so taking the time to understand that culture and mapping appropriately the talent is going to be key.
So if you're X hiring manager in X company, whether it's big bank, hedge fund, a tech firm, whatever, naturally there's going to be a culture within that organization, and there's things, there's heads that need to be filled, important hires, senior hires that are critical to moving the business forwards. How do you want recruiters to be engaging with you? What would you say would be best practice, factoring that that's not your job? So what would be the touch points for you that you feel this is how someone could go about learning the culture and bridging those gaps so they can start adding value as opposed to being a challenge?
I think a lot of it's to do with the questions that are asked and how proactive a recruiter is in asking those questions. So, them asking questions about, what's most important for you? What's your biggest challenge? What are you trying to solve for? How do you guys operate? How do you want to work? A question that rarely gets asked is, when you've historically hired, what has been the contributing factors to a successful hire? And not only just the closing of the hire, because I fundamentally believe that the vast majority of making a successful hire successful, if that makes sense, is what you do after their first day on the job. Everything beforehand is like, somewhat table stakes, somewhat you've got to go through that process. And you never really know about a candidate beforehand. It's with all the due diligence, with all the process you do, with the best will in the world and the best hiring process and engagement, you never really know 100% how great someone's going to work out until after the event. And a lot of it's to do with what you do afterwards. And so anything that can be done during the recruitment process by a recruiter to ask me things like your last 5 hires, what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, what were the mistakes, what were the standout kind of achievements or successes during that process, and then kind of tap into that and say, well, okay, can we reverse engineer that somehow to figure out how to kind of get similar results in the future?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I mean, speaking, selfishly, I guess, in terms of like, my business and how we try and work, we're aiming for that consultative partner. That's the sweet spot. But we struggle where some firms don't really want to engage us in that way. So they want everything centralized for a single point of contact. And normally that point of contact is someone who is a talent acquisition person that maybe their background is agency recruitment. So they don't have, and there are some that are exceptional at their jobs, and it makes so much difference for an agency. But there are some where those points that you mentioned of understanding why, why is this important for like my world when I'm going to market and that sort of thing. The people that are centralizing those processes, they don't understand it either. And what happens is they end up engaging a bunch of agencies. And I'm going to ask you because I've always wanted to know, but I don't know if you've done them before, the agency conference call.
I've done them.
Yeah. So I always get on and it pains me sitting there listening to the questions that you guys have to answer, because you can draw them out before the call even happens. Like, can you wait insert notice period here? Where should we go and look for these people? It's like, this is your job, dummy.
How many CVs do you want to receive?
Yeah. What did I hear the other day? There was a role, it was like a C# role, and this poor guy had spent half an hour really giving like great detail on the role. First questions, like, how important is C# experience for this role? He spoke about nothing else. Like, come on. But I always think, like, you must look at those calls and just think, just with dread.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, the analogy I was thinking about the other day was like, if you were to go and buy a car, ideally you'd want the car salesperson to have a real good appreciation of how a car works, the mechanics and the engine and the gearing and all that kind of jazz, right? And so, yeah, would they typically have that skill? Unlikely, because they're really about sales relationship. But if they had that low-level engineering background, fantastic. As close to that as possible would be ideal. And I think there's a lot of analogy there in the recruitment business, right? And so, to your point, half an hour discussing C#, and the first question is, how important is C#? You just clearly don't get it. Do you need a recruiter to be able to write code? No. But to understand and pick out the salient points about what's important and just glean some information around, okay, whether they need to have front-end experience, exposure, or do they need to have a database background, how client-focused will the role be, and the communication skills. It's not hard to do. I similar to you, I loathe those kind of group calls. Funny enough, I mean, earlier on, I used to kind of really had a reverse view. I used to love it because it allowed you to broadcast all the right information to all the recruiters. What I found over time, though, and I'm sure we may get to this later on, is recruitment is fundamentally relationships. Your relationships with the people you're sourcing with, my relationships with recruiters. So actually, it doesn't really serve me well to have 3 or 4 recruiters actively seeking one role. So if I'm in a situation where I'm talking to 3 or 4 recruiters at once about a role, how engaged are they all going to be? Because they know they're in comp with others. And so my view has somewhat changed. I don't know if I'm right or wrong in this, but my view has changed to be like, actually, if I can incentivize one recruiter who I've got a strong relationship with to go out there and get me the best candidate, I think I'm going to do okay, 9 times out of 10. Clearly, they've got to have a network and they've got to understand the role, and I've got to be able to work with them. But if I can find that recruiter, that's going to work really well. I think far better than commoditizing the role and having 3 guys reaching out. And I've had situations whereby I've spoke to a candidate and they've said, I've been approached by 3 or 4 folks for the role.
And it cheapens the brand.
I think
so. Cheapens the...
Can do.
Yeah, and this is a thing I think that's often misunderstood, is particularly when agencies work on a contingent model. So you get paid when you do a job, when you fill a role successfully. And obviously, particularly in the perm world, like that could be quite long processes and, non-competes or long notice periods, whatever, plays into it. So there is a sense of, if you're one of 5 agencies, how much are you going to prioritize that role relative to this role with this company where you're one of 2 agencies, for example. But there's also a sense where it creates a little bit of a race to the bottom, and recruitment companies then become motivated by, the phrasing they would probably use would be cover off everyone. So anyone who is broadly relevant for this job, we need to get to those people before anyone else does. And we need to tell them we're sending your CV for this role, so that when the next agency contacts them, they say, no, I've already been submitted. And half the time, people will be told you're being submitted for this role and they don't get submitted. And then they're turning down the same role with other agencies, because no agency, if they cover off, say, 40 people for a job, they're not going to send all 40. They're going to send 3, 4, 5, 6, however many they're going to send. But that gives you this huge pool of people that think they're in contention for a role. They're then associating that role and subsequent lack of progression, because there's no feedback, there's no interviews, because they're not actually in the mix. That's a reflection then of the brand that the agency is working on behalf of. It's not a reflection of the agency, because the agency won't say, yeah, no, we haven't actually sent your CV. They'll say, oh yeah, we haven't got any feedback yet, or whatever. So then if you are, for argument's sake, Goldman Sachs, and you work on that model for a fairly important senior role or whatever, all of a sudden you've got this unknown amount of people who are having a terrible experience because an agency recruiter who maybe doesn't even know whether they should be right or not because they don't know enough about the market and what they recruit for, is making these arbitrary decisions of like, which one out of all these people should I send? And then next time there's a role that's maybe perfect for that person at Goldman, that individual's a bit reluctant to re-engage because they've had a bad experience of like, yeah, well, you had my CV before and I never got any feedback. And this is where the multi-agency model, and I understand the logic of maybe more lines in the water means you might have more chance of catching a fish. I get that, and maybe for more transactional hiring. But when you get in the world of financial services, trading, technology, I fully agree that you need an agency that is smart enough to ask intelligent questions and understand what you actually want, incentivized to work on it by knowing, look, I'm willing to leave this with you guys, but I need you to deliver. But I'm bought in and I'm committed, which is going to get commitment from them to go and work it. And then maybe a little bit of fear to say, if we're a week down the line and I haven't had any good profiles, I'm going to take it off you and give it to one of the others that are in my inbox. And that to me is a much more successful model than 4 or 5 agencies, sit on a call, answer irrelevant questions, send them all off, hope for the best.
Yeah, I never actually appreciated the race to the bottom situation that you just mentioned there in terms of like the negative connotations of going to market with multiple recruiters, that one recruiter may just go and blast the network, the market, to kind of protect themselves from other recruiters coming in. I actually never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
It clearly must happen. So I'm learning something today, actually.
They'll go in a database,
Yeah.
They'll pull up a long list of anyone who's in it, and they'll send your job description and the company name to 500 people in there, and then see who comes back. That is, I would say, 70% of agency recruitment.
70%.
In how would be a first port of call in those sort of very transactional, ultra competitive. The idea would be, we want to work 20 jobs a month and fill 10%. And then we're fine, the sales director is not going to give me a hard time next month. We're filling a quota. But this is where I think some of the disconnect is for a company that is interested in talent acquisition, which most are, because it's a huge challenge, especially now and post-COVID and everything else. There's so much to navigate in terms of talent acquisition on all sides of the fence. But actually, that broadening of the agency base does have a very, very negative effect on the brand, because you become associated with, they're always hiring and they never give me feedback because I just get hit with all these emails all the time. And it's interesting that you kind of say, I haven't really considered that, because I don't think that's really the way that agencies typically work is really commonly understood.
Yeah. So the consideration I have thought a lot about, and why I kind of like to work with one recruiter where possible, is, and I've learned this kind of the hard way from working previously with like large companies with like 200,000 plus employees, down to companies with small as like 120 people and everything in between. And what I found is with the smaller companies, clearly you're not doing as much hiring. Your volume of talent acquisition is never going to be of that level of the large banks you mentioned. And so for me, it's about motivation. How can I motivate the recruiter? It's almost a little bit selfish, right? I'm clearly motivated to get the best outcome I can and want, which is to hire quickly and the best possible talent. That's what I'm aiming to do. And so having those 3 or 4 firms in comp, if I'm only doing 2 or 3 hires a year, maybe, like net, gross hiring, how can you motivate the guys, the recruitment folks, to kind of go out there and do the hard yards to find that kind of unicorn that we're typically looking for when we're doing 2-3 hires, where it's one hire might be 30% of what you're trying to do for the year. It's not just one Java developer in a team of 20 in your 100,000 org. You kind of make a mistake. It's not material to what you're doing. It's important. It's a factor. Every hire is, no doubt. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be a game changer for the organization. Whereas if you're 150 person organization, I'm hiring 2 people, it's going to matter so much more. And so I need you to be able to work with me, because it's going to be a tough hire.
Yeah.
Like, we're in it together. Like, it's not going to be a walk in the park. We might get lucky. Chances are we won't. It's going to be a slog. It's going to require smarts, intelligence, creativity, communication. When you find that talent, when you find that person, and they're going to be that good, because clearly they're going to be amazing, then you're in competition as an employer. So you're going to have to then compete with somebody else that's looking to hire them as well. And so that process to give them a good experience and not have 3 or 4 recruiters contact them will pay dividends when you get to the final stage, end game, so to speak, of that process.
Yes, certainly if you're in a smaller org, because it's a bit more exclusive. You know, if you're an individual being headhunted for a job with a really credible firm, you know, you've not heard about it before, there's an exclusivity to that. There's a sense of, oh, this is probably something worth exploring, versus, well, that's the same thing that those 4 messaged me about last week. It's a different kind of feel. I think for banks, it's interesting when you say about the concept of like what material impact does the hiring have on the org. And I think you see this reflected in the market, where banks obviously hire lots of people. So maybe they, I think, their reputation in the market is safe for maybe some small areas within those banks that are fairly, considered really high level teams. But a lot of the roles are kind of a little bit of people leave every month, people join every month. It doesn't have that much of a material impact. In smaller companies, the hiring makes much more of an impact, and likewise the leaving of people makes more impact. How that manifests, I think, from the perspective of hiring people, is there's this huge differential between people in bigger firms that are cogs in wheels, and they on paper would look the same, but they struggle to find jobs in smaller organizations, versus those in smaller firms that, once they've experienced those environments, tend to want to stay in smaller environments because there's more scope. They can make more of an impact. They're maybe more valued. But then I think that also translates into the agency side and the talent acquisition side, where if you're hiring loads of people, sure, like you use loads of agencies, but then it creates a bit of a separation in the industry where like the better people are all gravitating out of those bigger shops because they're much more of a cog in a wheel style of environment. But I've obviously never worked in any of these environments. You have. So like, is that a fair assessment?
I think it is, I mean, the big banks are great places to work, right? You get a ton of experience and exposure, amazing training, variety of roles and experiences you can have. So it's a great underpinning for a career in finance. What are some of the challenges? To your point, it can become a commoditized role in person in that org. If you're one of 200,000 people, by definition, your ability to impact is going to be reduced and limited to some extent. So that's always going to be a challenge. The other thing I would say is, when you think about your skill set, let's say as a developer, for example, I've worked with some amazing developers who can crush and cut code with the best of them on the planet. And they would struggle in some small firms that I've worked with. Why? Because, coming full circle back to that culture piece, how they are as an individual just wouldn't really resonate or complement that organization. So if you're a great top 1% developer, but your idea of working is headphones in, plugged into the matrix, coding away, a little bit prickly as a character, maybe a little bit precious about what you want to do in terms of, I only do Java, I don't do C#, or I can do back end, but I'm really a front end guy. And I use the word prima donna, so it might be the best description, but you're precious, let's say, is probably a better description about the work you do. That's not going to work in a smaller firm. When you could be a top 1% developer, doesn't really matter. I need somebody that can be, if I'm hiring in a smaller firm, that can lend a hand to any area. They're not, they're agnostic about what they do. Clearly, they want to be challenged. They want to be exposed to great tech, work with smart people. We all want that. But can they lend their hands to kind of do more mundane work because they know it's for the good of the firm or the role? Can they deal with ambiguity? Can they deal with the grayness of what the role may need? Because what we're going to do this month, this quarter, might change by year end because businesses change, the market's changed, the prioritization has moved a lot, and so we're going to pivot and go 180. Can you handle that volatility? And if you're a great developer out of big firms and you've spent your time, the majority of your career, let's say, in that kind of space, I've seen it be a challenge for people to make that adoption, that transition to smaller firms. But equally, the reverse holds true, right? If you've only worked in a smaller firm for most of your career, and then you go to a big bank or a big insurance company, you can get lost. And people may not be so welcoming and looking out for you. And so you've got to find your way. And can you have that impact that you had in your previous place? Again, it's always a challenge in both directions.
So if there's someone listening to this that's maybe a junior to mid-level, developer or, a BA or something like that, they've done a grad program in a big bank, they've been trained well, they've had different looks, across the business. They're now in that kind of conveyor belt route of come in and do your job, and then, your next promotion, maybe you get a bit of leadership responsibility, and then your promotion after that, you get a bit more leadership responsibility. And they're interested in smaller environments where they can develop more of a well-rounded skill set and not as many tight verticals. Those character traits, those qualitative skills that you mentioned in terms of the agility to function in the grey and this sort of thing, what can individuals in those bigger firms, where maybe they don't have the bandwidth to get into the grey or to learn new skills as easily, or to have to be proactive and just have an idea and run with it, and they're buried in layers of sign-off and that sort of thing. What can those... And the reason I ask is I get a lot of messages on LinkedIn. I'm obviously quite sort of active on LinkedIn as I recruit for hedge funds, is what I do. And I get a lot of messages from people in banks saying, I'd love to work for a hedge fund. I've applied, I'd never get an interview. I don't know where I'm going wrong, what I should be presenting myself as, what I shouldn't be. Would you have any advice for that maybe 4 or 5 years person in a bank now that's seeing like, this isn't the path for me over the next 20 odd years, and I'd love to get into that world, I just don't know what I need to be presenting of myself?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'll do my best to kind of give an honest answer as best I can, right? So what do I think about that? This is another problem-solving exercise, right? So I'm an engineer by heart. So I'm the hammer where every problem's a nail, and I'm the kind of the engineering hammer, right? So I look at it as an engineering problem. So what I would advise someone to do in this situation is try to have the perspective of the hiring manager. And that goes for any kind of hiring or job seeking exercise you're doing. So if you're trying to find a role, you got to think about what is the problem on the other side. And what you really want to do is present yourself as the solution to the problem that the hiring manager has. And so he or she is looking for whatever they're looking for. I'd say, generally speaking, in the kind of alternative fund space, smallish shop, so less than, say, 1,500 people, they're looking for, and it's not, this is a generalist, is not kind of for every case, but for most cases, they're looking for multifaceted, multi-talented people. Folks who are strong technically, can communicate well, and are able to take on responsibility and thrive in ambiguous situations and forums, and able to kind of like figure things out. So you got to somehow find a way to demonstrate that in the interview process. And it's not going to be a case of submitting your CV to a shop and try and hopefully get a call back. You got to work with a good recruiter that has networks with the said firms. You need to present your profile in a way that kind of resonates with them. So, that variation of tech communication and responsibilities. And if you're fortunate enough to get an interview, you need to, that's where it's all going to kind of come down to it clearly. And so in that situation, you then really you got to do a ton of research. I mean, the amount of times I've interviewed people and they don't know anything about the firm I've worked for. And sometimes it's hard to get information about a firm, and I get that. But, contact your LinkedIn network. Can you find someone who knows someone that works there or has worked there? Are there other colleagues in the industry that can give you a sense of what it's like to work there? Can you ask relevant questions? Again, it's about demonstrating that you're the solution to the problem, because recruitment is a problem like any other, and so the solution has to be you. Now, before the interview process, can you increase your experience in technologies? Can you, so if you are a Python developer and you're more kind of ETL data driven, so you're good with data, you're good with databases, can you get a bit of React experience in the role, in your current role, that is? And if you can't, and you're committed to working in a hedge fund, a PE shop, or maybe a bank, if you want to do that, you're going to have to do it in your own time, right? So there's a pain and a sacrifice that has to be paid up front, I'm afraid. And so that's the reality of the situation. My kids always give me stick. I'm too much of a realist. I'm the guy in the family who's tells them very early on that Santa is, any kids listening? I
don't think we're going to have any kids listening.
I won't finish in that one. But, you have to deal with the reality, which is like, well, if you're going to want to work in a place where they want you to be able to be full stack, and you're you are a UI only guy but an expert, or a back end guy and an expert, you're going to have to learn the aforementioned gap. They're not going to, it's very rare a firm will hire you to then come in and learn the skill that they need for the job.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it happens. It does happen. And I've actually done that where I've hired based on potential, and you've gone out on a limb and gone, she's amazing. Like, we need to bring on board, and we'll work with them to learn the job, learn the skill that's missing. But more often than not, you're not going to do that. Why? Because it's a gamble, right? It's a risk. Your own credibility is on the line with each and every hire. When you hire somebody, they are representing you, your judgment in people and talent acquisition and management. So
there's political capital associated.
100%, yeah. Political capital, 100%. And so you want to spend that capital very wisely. And so you have to craft yourself to be the answer to the solution. So that means maybe, it's not going to be the end of the world to spend 6 weeks brushing up on a tech stack that you are a little bit rusty on or haven't experienced in a while.
Yeah.
I always ask people in interview questions, to talk around technology that they have recently learned. What are you passionate about? And see where they go. And so some folks have massively surprised me in terms of their commitment to learning a new skill because they know that it's going to be in demand or they have a passion for it.
So when you ask them that question,
yeah,
I would imagine, and this is probably similar to when you say, what do you know about us?
Yeah.
The real under the hood kind of nuance of the answer they give is probably less important than the fact that they've gone and done it. So when you say, what do you know about us? You care less about what they know, but more that they know stuff, that they've gone out of their way to do some research, to take it seriously, to have answers to those questions, whether it's about AUM or how many headcount you've got, or do you know someone that knows someone who works there, or whatever. Is that bit a little bit less important than the fact of just show that you're taking it seriously? It doesn't matter if you've learned React or you've learned Python or you've learned AWS, just go and do something outside of just what you're being paid to do to show that proactivity and that commitment to yourself from a learning, and development perspective.
Yeah, 100%. So something, again, that I'm constantly learning. So, being in this kind of forum, I'm not trying to come across an expert in any way, shape or form, right? It's every day's a school day, right? So that said, what I have, or what I'm really looking for when I'm hiring, fundamentally, I think really, is somebody who is conscientious, who cares about what they do. Because if they, you want someone smart for sure and can communicate, and those kind of things are kind of a given. But what you're really looking for, what I'm really looking for over time, certainly now, is somebody who's conscientious and cares. And why that matters? Because, there's some phrase about, hard work beating smarts, whatever, something like that. The ability to kind of care, to do due diligence, to really struggle, figure things out, and not quit until it's done, can get you really far, like really, really far. And so the fact that you've taken some time to read a website and understand what the company does and what the AUM is, or where our offices are, what was the most recent office opened? Someone kind of goes, oh, I know that your last office was opened in Mumbai or in wherever it could be. Okay, that's a level of due diligence that you've done that probably resonates in a lot of what you do.
How you do anything is how you do everything, right?
Yeah,
So
I think so. And so I think that's key.
I saw, I can't remember who said it, but there was an interview with someone and they were talking about what do you look for when you hire? And it was a brilliant answer. And he said, I look for two things: conscientiousness, batteries included. That was it.
I love that.
And because he said,
ready to go.
Skill set wise, when they hire, it's like, yes, we're hiring someone to come in and do a job right now. So we're not going to hire someone to come in and be a Java guy who's never touched Java before, or they'd have to be seriously impressive, to do that. But particularly for perm hiring, you're hiring people for the skills they bring, but you're also in smaller environments where the pace of evolution is so much faster. You're hiring people for that ability to go and learn, an ability to pick up new skills and to be multidisciplinary in their mindset. And that concept of like batteries included, I think was really good, in a sense of, we see job descriptions every day of the week, and these specs often are really big and they list a bunch of stuff, and we go to market and like 90% of people say that doesn't exist. And the conversations I'm having with them is like, yeah, but they don't need it to exist. They just want someone who's maybe 70% of the way there and has got the ability to come in, be a solution provider, rather than someone that comes in and kind of causes problems. Someone that solves problems, but also someone that's going to go and pick this stuff up, because no one's going to know everything. But in my experience of hiring, particularly for funds, they don't hire people for like tangible skills. It's a bit of a given of like, you need to have experience in this. They hire people and for those under the hood skills, conscientiousness, batteries included, all this sort of thing, because that's what makes a great hire over time, as opposed to maybe for contract, a little bit different of like, we've got a 6-month piece of work and that's all it's going to be. So we just need someone who can do the job. But to answer, I guess, the question that's always in my inbox of like, well, what should I be doing? Those things you mentioned of just some extracurricular stuff. Just show that there's a bit more to you than just the day job, because that's much more transferable to a smaller environment, that ability to get things done off your own back, than it is to say, well, I've just got like endless kind of technical skills that actually you don't really know anything about.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. What you mentioned there, the last part, kind of that leads to kind of the second thing I look for mostly after, when hiring. So, and it's really hard to figure out in the recruitment process. So it is a challenge. But after conscientiousness, the other aspect is adaptability, which I think is what you're really referring to. So, and again, it's for the same reason. It's, that, especially in the smaller firms, but certainly in larger firms too, but certainly specifically in smaller firms, things are going to change. Strategy is going to change. Opportunities are going to be constant. And so somebody who can kind of adapt and change to the ebbs and flows of the organization, strategy, the business and tech, that's going to be key. And so the only way to really demonstrate that fully is backward looking. It's like, I've done C# and I've done a bit of Java and I've done some Python. And so I might not be an expert. I'm going to have my core Java as my core language, but I've thrown my hat to a few other skills and technologies and so on. And so that's kind of where you can demonstrate that. And then when you're obviously in an interview, there'll be questions that you can ask to kind of glean how adaptable somebody is. But to me, conscientiousness and adaptability is kind of my evolving thread that I'm looking for when I'm hiring. And if I can get those two, if I can be pretty confident that somebody has those two aspects, I'm probably going to overlook some of the technicals, to be honest. I really am, personally.
Yeah.
I'm not an everyday coder, so maybe that I have a little bit of I have some perspective when it's like, if I'm in the weeds coding every day, then maybe I might have a different perspective. I like to think not though. I think you can do a lot with someone who's conscientious and can adapt, because that means that they can pick up a new skill, new language. It means they're going to care. And so what's likely to get deployed into production is going to be high quality first time. And if it's not, and if there's an issue or challenge or problem, they're going to work really hard to rectify that because they care. It matters for them. Personally, professionally, they're going to be committed to a good outcome. You can do so much with that.
How do you assess it in your interviews? Do you have like go-to questions and then templated kind of things that you want to hear back? Or are you gauging it much more on just feel and the vibe and, just your assessment of someone as a person, in front of you?
Yeah. So crucially, hiring is a team sport, team effort. Same where I work, we feel that way about hiring. So it's never down to one sole individual. So yes, if I'm interviewing, if I'm a hiring manager for the role, my opinion, my voice is going to have significant weight to it, but not the only one. But to answer your question, when I'm interviewing, I have a core set of questions I want to ask and I want to kind of get through the process, but I'll adjust depend on the conversation. Sometimes when you're interviewing, there's a good energy, it's flowing, and so you kind of drop the script. You have to be flexible, I think, to some extent, and kind of go, look, it's not gonna work. It's just gonna land well. Me asking the questions I was normally going to ask, it just would be weird. It just kill the mood. It just wouldn't resonate. So you have to adjust on the fly and then kind of, figure out a way to get that information that you want another way. And other times it's really hard. You're interviewing somebody and it's like, it feels it can be a slog, and some people have a different energy, right? So you got to work doubly hard to go, well, maybe they're just nervous, maybe just nerves, right? And so you got to maybe go more scripted, maybe you can slow things down a bit. You might need to re-emphasize some of the questions to make sure you get the right answer. And you're trying to help them present themselves in the best light, because again, you're trying to solve the problem. The thing is, every time someone comes through the door and I'm interviewing, I'm hoping, praying that person is the person for the job. I'm not trying to find a way to kind of like shut them down and go like they're not the one. I'm trying to get them to be successful for the process, because I want this to be the last interview I need to do. But to make sure we get the right outcome, I do my thing, I talk, I figure out what I'm trying to get out of the my specific interview. Sometimes I'm kind of going technical, sometimes I'm trying to figure out if they're going to resonate in the organization, will they be successful? Sometimes I'm trying to figure out if they would like the organization or whatever it may be. And then I hand over to other people who are part of the process, and they're all looking for something else. So a good process, a helpful process is one where everybody has a part to play, a role, hence a team sport. Someone's going to be like hardcore in C#. Someone's going to be checking out their architecture skill set. Someone's going to be checking out communication. Someone may check how they operate under pressure. And someone just wants to figure out how they are to work with. You're going to work with them for hopefully years. If it's a perm role, minimum of a year. If it's a contract, you're going to be sat next to them. You're going to want to spend time with them fundamentally.
Yeah.
And be in the trenches with them to figure out stuff. And so, you want to figure that in the process as well. So, a good process means you can kind of tackle all that through the process. Now, the question is like, how long is that process? And can you wrap it up in a shorter time frame or not? That's always a challenge. But yeah, I think fundamentally that's what you're trying to do.
And that's something I think that firms struggle with a little bit, is the concept of, well, how long should a process be? Because you're engaging great candidates. They're also in the process with, other companies or whatever. There's always an element of competition for the best people. So you've got to do your diligence. You've got to get the different looks. It's got to be a team sport. But at the same time, can't be too long, otherwise potentially you're going to lose people. So I do think it's quite a tricky environment to navigate. One of the things you mentioned is you're going into interviews like, I really hope this is the one. And I think sometimes this is a concept that's a little bit lost, bringing it back to sort of the recruitment side of the fence and how recruiters can add value, in a sense of like, recruitment's not your day job. Your day job is doing what you do. The recruitment piece is the necessary evil to be able to move the org in the direction that it wants to go. But it's time consuming. And I think for a lot of agencies, they measure their value or their performance to you as a hiring manager based on the number of CVs that they're sending you and the number of interviews that you're doing for those CVs, and all this sort of thing is like performance metrics to go, well, I'm on the right track. Whereas I think it's the opposite. I think an agency's job is to get you to spend the minimum amount of time possible to find someone that you feel is the right person. So the lower that all of that can be, the least amount of CVs that you can be sent and the least amount of interviews that you have to do, provided the quality is there, you in theory should have maybe speak to 3 people. They're all there or thereabouts. You engage the best fit, the best person on both sides of that, you know, who you're the best fit for and vice versa. But I think that's lost a little bit sometimes, that comprehension of like, your motivation is just to fill the jobs as quickly as possible with the right person. And sometimes agency motivation comes in the sense of they're trying to make a fee and they get frustrated if they're not hitting the mark, and they sort of go, oh, well, they're looking for something that doesn't exist, or they're not serious about hiring, and then they move on. Mm-hmm. And then you're still there like, oh, and now we've got to go back to market and we've got to find new agency partners and everything else. And it must be really frustrating when you're just looking to get the right people in seat and, you know, and to grow.
It is. And I think it's where it comes down to relationships again, right? Because in the example you gave, like where you have maybe your unicorn job spec and you're looking for every skill set that you want, plus great skills, immediately available, good comms, right? Eventually, when you're going through that process, it's going to be hard to, you know, to kind of secure a candidate, find candidates. And I think it's at that point, it's the recruiter's role, their job, their responsibility to kind of go, let's have a conversation. Like, this is what we're seeing in the market. It's not about excuses, but, you know, one of the things that you guys can bring to the process is the market intelligence. That's what you guys bring. So you want to be able to leverage that and say, look, well, we've been on the search for X weeks. This is what we're seeing. Now we can continue with the search as we are doing and trying to weed out candidates that don't meet the full criteria. But is there any flex? And if so, where is the flex? It's like buying a house, right? We all have lofty ambitions of this amazing detached home with a garage and a fence, and it's on a quiet road with a great school, and it's been really newly done, but you want to make one change to it to make it personalized. That's the small kind of cupboard room. Yeah, if only. And it's under budget, right? Mm. The reality is that you're going to have to overextend yourself, or it's going to be in a slightly up and coming area than you wanted it to be, whatever it could be. It's the same with the hiring, and we know this. And so that relationship, that ability to have candid conversations about, okay, well, it's not working so well. So where do we want to have some more flexibility? Is it going to be the budget on the role? Is it going to be the skill set? So we're going to drop from full stack to maybe either one or front end or back end, and they'll learn the other. So that person's going to have that adaptability we talked about earlier, or something else. And so to have that frank conversation, that to me is a testament to a good recruiter and a good relationship. Mm. If I'm going to ask what I want, and I want everything day one, and I'm going to challenge you to go figure it out and get it. Mm. If you don't come back to me and tell me that I'm with the birds, then we haven't got that relationship, right? Or you're not committed enough to kind of help me solve that. And so you just die down. I don't hear from you for a month's time because you have given up, to your point, and gone off to the next assignment. Whereas I'd much rather you come back to me and say, look, I really think we've got to make a change here.
I remember us having that conversation in your previous shops where we'd gone to market. There was a big, the big wish list. And then I remember there was a candidate that you were sort of like, look, there's 2 out of the 3 boxes, but I want the 3rd box as well. And we ended up having a fairly good, like constructive, but it was a bit of that sort of conversation. It was like, look, that's not going to exist unless you start putting a lot more money on it, or you're going to wait for a non-compete or whatever. And actually there's value in bringing someone that has those 2 things, as long as you feel that they've got the raw materials that they can get the 3rd thing in a not unreasonable length of time. And then I think you ended up hiring that chap. But those conversations are predicated on the recruiter understanding their market, understanding the tech, understanding like how the world, works on your side of the fence. And this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges of the industry is there's a huge, I dread to think how many tech recruiters there are even in London, thousands, who don't understand technology, and they recruit for banks, but all they know of a bank is, I've got a HSBC current account. And they have no comprehension of trading, and regulation and accounting and reference data and, pricing and all these things that are fundamental. And they're then going to market to look at these roles, and they're looking at, we need XYZ people to build XYZ systems, with no real understanding beyond just being able to go, well, that's a word on a spec, and then that's a word on the CV, so they must be a match. And that's where the industry, on the recruitment side, needs to do so much more, because most agencies couldn't have that conversation with you, in a sense of they don't understand enough about the market, and also they know their own limitations, so they'll be really wary of saying stuff at risk of making themselves look like idiots, or look like they're not knowledgeable, because obviously everyone wants to present themselves as, I'm the best in my space and I'm a specialist in this and whatever. And it's like, the reality is all the value is in it being that two-way street and the partnership to sort of go, yeah, of course you want everything, but that's not realistic relative to the marketplace. Or actually, no, it is realistic, but you might have to put 20 grand on the budget. And that's now a conversation that we need to have. And then ditto, to come to you and say, this person maybe isn't a perfect match on paper, but I've met them and they've got this and they've got this and they've got this, and I really think it'll be worth your time speaking to this person. But again, there's a lot of inherent risk there, for the same reason as when you hire someone internally, you're putting your name against it, they need to be a good hire. If I'm coming to you and saying, I really think you should speak to this person, even though they're not a perfect match on paper, if they're then not worth speaking to, that's going to reflect really badly on me as a recruiter, because I'm the one who's vouched, for it. So then that becomes, I think, a little bit of a challenge for agencies, where they're worried about, I don't know enough to really assert to this person, and I'm worried that if they're not right, he's not going to work with me after that. He's not going to want to engage me as an agency partner, and then I'm going to lose the work. So actually, it's a lot easier to just default to, it says Java here and it says Java here, so I'll just throw that over the fence. And then therein lies a lot of the challenges, and it's a difficult one to work out without the recruiters taking it on themselves to go and upskill in this stuff. And that requires time. It's really easy for me to sit here and have that conversation with you. I've been doing it for 16 years. But when I've been doing it a year, I probably wouldn't have been able to have that conversation with you.
Again, it's another problem that I hadn't thought about from the recruiter's point of view. So it's actually quite interesting that you've articulated that way. My immediate response would be to kind of push through and be brave in terms of saying this person's not perfect, but you should speak to them. Why I say that? Because it's a process. So it's kind of like the investment you've got to go through to come out the other end and be better at your craft, I would imagine. So if you're able to do that, and say, let's say it's worst case scenario, you kind of go out on the limb and say, this person doesn't match the role, doesn't match the JD, but I really think you should speak to them. They've got a lot of things going for them, have a conversation. And I meet them and they're terrible. Yeah, I mean, that's not great, clearly. I would think most hiring managers, whatever they are, whatever pressures they're under, will spend a bit of time to explain why. And if they don't, you should ask them, why did it not work out? Give me some feedback. And then you've now learned a lesson for the next time. So if you've got that relationship, then it can survive that. If you're worried that your client, I guess in this case, is going to act unfavorably and terminate your arrangement, you've got a bigger issue. You've got a relationship issue in the first place. So in that case, you're on a transactional basis anyway. So I would suggest, that's the case, at least the one thing you can get from that process is an education, some learning about what didn't quite work. So when you're in that situation again, you know what you're looking for, the minutiae, or the minutiae, the kind of the kind of finer points in the profile. So you're not just doing a buzzword bingo in terms of Java being on CV versus job description. You're going into like, actually, well, where have they been learning Java, and what kind of project, and what was the exposure on their involvement on that project, and are you asking the candidate the right questions so you can get a feel for it? You're not going to know how good they are at Java, probably not, but you might be able to find out how much impact they had in the role, how well they can articulate their involvement, and that can help you better represent them.
Yeah. And this from that, for me, really encapsulates sort of where some of the big challenges are in the industry, because I think that every client comes to the table just wanting to fill jobs. Same as the house scenario, you go and get estate agents because you want to buy a house. And the motivation is true. And I think agencies just want to fill jobs. But the disconnect is your opinion of someone vouches and someone says, meet this person, it doesn't go well. You'll then spend more time having a chat with that person and realign them. I would say that's probably not shared across the market. You're a bit of a minority there, in a sense of, I think most companies take much more of a transactional view to how they engage agencies anyway. And actually there would then be you've wasted our time, we don't want to work with you anymore. Maybe not terminate the whole agreement, but like on this role. And I can sort of see both sides of it. One of the bigger challenges that's coming in that has become very entrenched over the years, which is more of a concern, I think, is there's a real centralization now of talent acquisition within companies. So a lot of companies are looking at bringing in their own, in-house recruiters to try and save some money on agency fees. And obviously agency fees are, fairly considerable if you hire in volume. I think there's also a sense of, if we build a centralized team, they're going to be better at understanding our culture, and they maybe have a bit more clout going to the market. What normally happens in those scenarios is all lines of communication become centralized into those teams. And that relationship for maybe a younger recruiter who's trying to build relationships with people like yourself, they can't do that without really running a big risk of the internal talent acquisition team saying, hey, you're not allowed to do this. So then it creates this blocker where it's like, how does somebody try and learn your culture and vouch for someone and put that slightly left field but really high quality candidate in front of you when they're not allowed to talk to you, other than in the prism of big conference call, everyone sit on it, dial in, and that's a challenge now, I think, for everyone, because it doesn't move the client forward in that sense of, I want to fill the role and what's the right way to do this. It also doesn't help the agency in any way. But it does have some benefit in a sense of, it saves you being called 17 times a day with questions that maybe aren't going to be the most intelligent. So you can understand why that happens. But again, in this concept of maybe companies not always acting in their own best interest from a talent acquisition perspective, that one screams to me of, how can any agency ever really understand your culture? And, when I asked you why a recruiter's a challenge, the first thing you said was them understanding your perspective in your world, if they're not allowed to talk to you.
I was smiling. Why? Because I previously worked for an organization where they were very rigid around the communication flow between recruiter, the internal HR sourcing team, and the hiring manager, to the extent where it kind of slipped in a conversation with HR that a recruiter had spoken to me directly, just had a innocuous conversation about the role. They wanted more information, and the world of pain that fell upon that poor recruiter was quite shocking. And yeah, it's really tough. I don't know what the answer is for that one. That's a real tough one, because in those organizations where they really want to centralize the hiring process and the communication, and I get I think we all get the rationale for it. It's kind of minimize the interactions with the hiring manager. They can focus on their day job.
Let you get on with your job.
Yeah, and they'll deal with all the kind of HR administration. But I get it. I don't subscribe to that approach, if I'm honest, even with the big firms where it's more prevalent, because you don't get to have the relationships on both sides. You don't get to build something together. And you have more gatekeepers, more lost in translation, more bureaucracy. And so you want to kind of cut through that ideally and get straight to it. So it's a real challenge. How that recruiter would get through that process, again, it's going to have to come down to bravery. You have to break some rules. You're going to have to kind of talk to the hiring manager, like by hook or crook, and get some information and keep it on a DL.
And then hope they go to bat for you when, when TA find out.
Yeah. Fundamentally, if you deliver for that hiring manager, then you're kind of great, right? They're going to make concessions for you.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it's a subject that you and I have sat down and had lunches and coffees and gone really into this stuff fairly regularly, and it's a topic that is, I think, very, very important, because talent acquisition at macro level is so important for companies, especially nowadays. The ability to find and actually land the best talent on the market is a huge variable in a sense of how successful are you going to be as a business. And getting those processes right in a way that respects your time and you're not being just hammered constantly by recruitment companies, but at the same time allows the interaction and the constructive relationship building and the feedback loops and everything else that you need recruiters to have to actually enable you to spend less time on recruitment, because the people that you're getting are more relevant and they're more aligned. And then you get to that sort of level where, and I'm lucky that I've been doing this a long time and there wasn't that centralization when I began, and I built relationships with people. But there are people that I work with now, similar to yourself, if I'm recruiting for you, that you'll just give me a call and you'll say, well, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And then you'll give me feedback on people and say, well, I didn't quite like that, but I like this, whatever. And it becomes actually a much better and more enjoyable process for everyone because that's there. But I do think now, it's harder and harder for companies to be able to do that effectively because of the centralization. And a good talent acquisition person, and I work with some really great ones, can add so much value. But a not so good one really can push you quite a long way back in terms of you achieving your targets, which are like, I just want to interview someone and they be right, and then go back to doing my day job, which is more important and more time consuming. The other thing I'd love to talk about, I think we've covered that kind of hiring side in detail, is when you're moving jobs as the candidate. And this is something that I'm very interested in. Recruiters, interviews, job descriptions, CVs is just another day. It's fairly normal. But say for someone like yourself, for example, who you're in organizations for 4, 5, 6 years, whatever at a time, and your peers in the industry, when you go to market, it's not just another day. It's big, life events, job moves, impact family, impact your mental health, your kind of onward career trajectory, all this sort of stuff. And you maybe have not done an interview for 5 years. And now all of a sudden you're thrown into this world of like agencies and not really understanding how do you get the best out of them, or whose side are they on, and are they helping me, or are they kind of trying to undercut, or whatever it might be. So I'm assuming the job moves that you've made historically, you've used agencies for some of them at least.
Yeah, I think probably the vast majority have been either a recruitment firm or an executive search firm. So I guess same thing, but a different name, but different focus. So yeah, there's always been a kind of intermediary. I've had colleagues who have kind of moved multiple times in their careers, and it's always been through a internal networking communication. So they've known someone in a firm, and so they've moved that way. I've not had that experience. It's mostly been, to be honest, most of the times when I've looked, or rather moved historically, I've never been actively looking, and someone's approached me to have a conversation. And then you can tell the quality of a recruiter like within 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Maybe.
Right. So that would then be the first question. How? So you're not looking for a job. you're being proactively engaged. I'd imagine quite often now with the prevalence of LinkedIn and everything else, the inbox is probably always ticking over with different agencies trying to get in there. What are the things that stand out? So within that 3 minutes where you go, right, this is something that I should take seriously, or I'm more inclined to take seriously. What do you want to be seeing in those 3 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, so, historically when I've been approached, when I've been in previous positions, it's even like the most fundamental things, right? Like the most basic of things. So I've been approached historically for roles where it was just clearly not a great fit, so I've been fortunate enough to have a, relatively successful career, and I've had some great roles and great opportunities, and I've had a varied career background. So I've been approached for everything from like a BA role to a head of trading desk, trading, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And so just an inability to understand, what am I doing today? What was I doing 2 years ago, 3 years ago in that role? And then making sure that the role that you're pitching to me makes sense based on where I am today, what I'm doing historically, right? And what would be a good next step for someone in that role for their next position. And so if you don't even know that this role would not be exciting to me, tells me you don't understand your craft, your domain, because a credible, valuable recruiter would be able to know, actually, this guy, this role, not a fit, just not a fit. And so you spend 30 seconds explaining what the role is, and like, dude, like, come on, like, this is not really going to work. I'm not talking about comp or financials. This has nothing to do with that. Take that to one side. That's a whole nother story. This is just about role, opportunity, career progression, match of skills with the work you want to do and what the role requires. And you can't even connect those two together. You're representing that client, that firm who's trying to hire. And if you're having this conversation with me, that in a similar fashion with other people, you're not really helping your client at all. You're really not.
So if we, and I mean, look, I agree on all that stuff. To play devil's advocate slightly, if you've got Mr. ED or senior VP or MD or whatever in a bank at the moment, for argument's sake, and they say, I want that scenario of, I want someone to proactively reach out to me who knows what they're doing, and I want them to present me with a job that is a good next step for me. I don't want to go and look for it, and then I'm going to go meet them, and if I feel it's the right job, I'm kind of ready. I'm not unhappy, but if the right thing comes along, I'm going to make a move, right? Nowadays, the vast majority of that style of recruitment is done on LinkedIn. And I have known you far too long to have looked at your LinkedIn profile recently. So I don't know the answer to this question. But I would say that for that scenario to play out and for you to get value out of it, there's going to be an obligation on the individual that your LinkedIn needs to have at least some degree of information about what you're doing at the moment in order for that approach to you to be relevant. Because otherwise, if it just says ED, fixed income trading technology, JP Morgan Chase, how can someone bridge in a proactive approach? How can there be any sense of what would or wouldn't be relevant? Because no idea really what you're doing, or that concept of things like progression and everything else is completely subjective. So what that means to you is going to be very, very different to what it means to the next person to an unintelligent recruiter's eye, where it kind of all says the same stuff.
Yeah, so I'm talking about, okay, so this is the distinction, between like a kind of good recruiter who's kind of struggling to kind of make that nuanced decision, and a poor recruiter who, in your example, fixed income, fill in the blanks, bank, ED level, developer, tech lead, and then you're going to that same person asking them
£400 a day contract role.
Yeah, or I was going to say like a kind of a BA role.
Yes.
Or a head of trading role, like trading on the business side. Because you've seen fixed income trading, you've assumed that person is a trader. And so you're coming to them saying, do you want to work in trading?
Yeah.
Like, come on. So
it's not so much the real under the hood of the role, but it's just the high level, come on, like draw enough parallels to at least be the right ballpark.
It's just laziness, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those are the poor guys. So that's like, to be fair, that's not the majority of recruiters, not that bad, but it's like, it's got to be like high teens, low 20%, right? Maybe at 20%, let's say.
Yeah.
I like that. So then you're in the second tranche, which is like, okay, they're just okay to good, but they're not able to convey the important aspects of a role that anybody looking to make a move will want to know.
Yeah.
So that's like team size. No idea what a team size is. What's the reporting lines? You don't know that information yet. Maybe you know the budget if you're lucky. So, if you don't know the team size, reporting lines, and the budget, what are you really expecting a prospective candidate to do? So I think of myself again back in my hiring hat. If I have somebody out there working on my behalf and they're not telling people that I'm trying to hire that they're going to work for me or somebody in my team, what our team size is and how big we are, that's a real problem. Like, how are you going to, what are we doing here?
Yeah. So it's getting enough from them to sort of go, right, it's at least worth, like, the ballpark is right. It's the right level. It's reporting into the right level of seniority. The comp is there or thereabouts in terms of the right ballpark. It's, a role that, headline level at least seems broadly relevant. That's worth then at least having a conversation or whatever. Let's say that then evolves into you're now going into this process as someone who's not looking for a job. You've been in a role at a bank for 4 years or whatever, and someone like me's turned up and gone, look, I've got this opportunity over here with this firm that maybe you haven't got any networks with, you don't really know too much about them. You go through the process. What are the things I don't really like this word, but as a candidate, what are the things that you want from an agency from start to finish where you would go, they've really done a good job? Like, how can an agency add value to you as, Mr. Candidate who's not looking but is interested and wants to go through an interview process?
I guess the best way I can answer that is kind of when it's worked well, from my perspective historically, what has been those activities or behaviors that I felt, okay, this has been a good process. And I think it's about fundamentally, to some extent hand-holding the person that's thinking about making a move. To your point, if they're not actively looking, haven't moved in a while, it's likely to be a bit of a nerve-wracking experience, kind of going back onto the market again and thinking about moving on. And so little things like some good recruiters do this, which is checking in after let's say you have an interview, checking in after the interview to see how it went. What kind of questions came up? How do you feel about that? Was there anything you wanted to know that we didn't cover? Was there anything you wanted to share back to the kind of interviewers in terms of the process? Those things kind of go a long way. Things that worked really well in the past is when, if you can you share and package up resumes and profiles of the hiring or interviewing personnel in the interview process. That can be a really nice touch, so that okay, these are people I'm going to meet. These are their background, experience, and it allows you to prep for that in a much better way.
Yeah.
If I was a recruiter, it'd be a bad day if I was, but
I think you'd be a great recruiter.
I don't know.
You'd be a brilliant recruiter.
Flattery would get you everywhere. But all joking aside, if I was a recruiter, the mindset I would have with the candidate when I'm helping them would be to kind of act like a fan in their corner, like I'm kind of rooting for them. And that would be the general kind of vibe I would give off. I'd be like, hey, you ready for today? And you got all the information, and then good luck, and give them all the information and all the kind of boosting they need to feel amazing for the next hour, 2 hour, or half day interview session, whatever it is. Because you can't help them be better at their craft.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can really do is give them information, and B, make them feel as confident as possible, but not overconfident, so they go in arrogant. And then afterwards, you want to be like, making them feel like it was good, and even if it was, and they're coming back saying it wasn't that great, and I messed up on this question, you downplay the negatives, like I'm sure it wasn't a big deal, or no, I think they really liked you. What more can you do? So be a fan for them and really root for them in that process.
Yeah.
That mindset, that approach is I think all the activities you do around that will kind of logically and naturally help and give you a good perspective and give a good kind of vibe, for want of a better word, to the candidate, right? If you do that, you can't go too far wrong.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up. I could talk about this with you for days, but I'm also conscious you've got a family at home, and at some point I've got to let you go.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming in. I think there's been a huge amount here for people on your side of the fence, but also people on my side of the fence, in terms of actually understanding how some of this stuff works and how to get the best out of it. And I'd love to do it again.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it too. And I actually learned a lot about your side of the fence, right? And some of the challenges that you guys have as recruiters. And as a hiring manager, you often forget it and don't think about it. So it's nice to have that additional perspective.
Well, this is, dialogue, I think, is the answer. Everyone's trying to get to the same end. It's just about how does all the integrated parties work together to get the best out of each other so that we can all achieve the thing that we all want to achieve, which is like successful hiring, basically. That's the conversation for round 2.
Round 2.
Appreciate you, Greg. Thanks very much.
Thank you.